The dust of the Nebraska plains clung to Sarah Emerson's black morning dress like a second skin, each grain a reminder of the 70 miles she had walked since burying her husband 3 weeks ago. Her worn boots scraped against the packed earth of Fort Kearny's Main Street, the sun beating down mercilessly on this scorching July day in 1875. And she knew that if she did not find work by nightfall, she would have to sleep outdoors again with nothing but her shawl and the memory of better days. She had been a wife for only 2 years when cholera took James, leaving her with nothing but debts, and a landlord who wasted no time claiming their small homestead outside Omaha. The banker had looked at her with pity, but no mercy when she asked for time, and the neighbors who had once smiled at her across the church pews suddenly found their floors fascinating when she walked past. So she walked away from that life, carrying only what fit in a small canvas bag, heading west toward the rumors of ranch work and kitchen positions in the growing territories. Fort Kearny bustled with afternoon activity despite the oppressive heat. Wagons rolled past loaded with supplies, their drivers shouting at tired oxen. Soldiers from the nearby military post walked in pairs, their blue uniforms crisp despite the climate. Women in bonnets hurried between the general store and the butcher's shop, and somewhere a blacksmith's hammer rang out a steady rhythm against hot iron. Sarah's stomach growled, reminding her that the last meal she had eaten was yesterday morning when a kind farmer's wife had given her bread and butter in exchange for mending 3 shirts. She approached the first establishment that looked promising, a boarding house with fresh paint and clean windows. The woman who answered her knock took one look at Sarah's dusty appearance and shook her head before Sarah could even speak. "We do not need help," the woman said, already closing the door. "Please, I am a hard worker. I can cook, clean, sew, tend gardens, whatever you need," Sarah said quickly, hating the desperation in her voice but unable to hide it. "I said no. Try the saloon if you are that desperate." The door shut with finality. Sarah's cheeks burned at the implication, but she moved on. The general store owner barely glanced up from his ledger before dismissing her. The restaurant owner said he already had family working his kitchen. The seamstress said business was too slow to justify another set of hands. By the time the sun began its descent toward the horizon, Sarah had been rejected by every respectable establishment in town, and her legs trembled with exhaustion. She found herself at the edge of town, staring out at the endless prairie, fighting back tears of frustration and fear. She had been so certain she would find something, anything. The thought of sleeping outside again made her want to weep, but she had cried herself empty over James's grave. No tears came now, only a hollow ache and the question of what to do next. "You look lost, madam." Sarah turned to find a man astride a large bay horse, his silhouette framed against the lowering sun. He sat easy in the saddle, the kind of natural posture that came from years of riding. As he moved his horse closer, she could make out more details. Tall and lean, probably in his late 20s, with dark hair that needed cutting and eyes that looked almost black in the fading light. His clothes marked him as a working rancher, practical and worn but well-maintained. A hat shadowed his face, but she could see concern there, not the judgment she had faced all day. "I am looking for work," Sarah said, lifting her chin despite her exhaustion. She would not be pitied by a stranger, no matter how tired she was. "You walked here." His eyes took in her dusty dress, her worn boots, the small bag that contained everything she owned. "I did." "How far from Omaha?" Something flickered across his face that might have been surprise or respect. He swung down from his horse with fluid grace, and she could see he was indeed tall, at least 6 feet, with broad shoulders and strong hands that held the reins with casual competence. Up close, she noticed the small scar above his left eyebrow and the weathering around his eyes that came from squinting into sun and wind. "That is a considerable distance," he said quietly. "You must be hungry." "I am looking for work, not charity," Sarah replied, though her stomach chose that moment to growl loudly enough for both of them to hear it. The corner of his mouth twitched, not quite a smile but something softer than amusement. "I am Isaac Xander. I run a ranch about 5 miles north of here. My housekeeper left last month to live with her daughter in Colorado, and I have been making do on my own, which is to say things are in a sorry state. Can you cook? Yes. Clean? Yes. Do you know anything about chickens? I kept a flock of 20 for 2 years. He nodded slowly, studying her face in a way that made her want to look away, but she held his gaze. She needed this, whatever he was offering, and she would not get it by showing weakness. "The work is hard," Isaac said. "I have 6 ranch hands who need feeding 3 times a day. The house has not been properly cleaned in weeks. The chickens are half wild from neglect, and the garden is more weeds than vegetables at this point. But the pay is fair, room and board included, and I can promise you will be safe and respected on my land. When can I start?" The words came out before she could stop them, before she could negotiate or ask questions or show any of the caution James used to tease her about. "Now, if you like. Though truthfully, I think you should start by sitting down before you fall down, then maybe eating something, then resting. The work will still be there tomorrow." Sarah wanted to argue, to prove she was strong enough to start immediately, but her legs chose that moment to shake so badly she had to lock her knees to stay upright. Isaac moved quickly, his hand under her elbow, steady and warm even through her sleeve. "When did you last eat a proper meal?" he asked, and there was something in his voice that reminded her of James, a gentleness that seemed at odds with his rough exterior. "Yesterday morning, but I am fine, I just need to sit for a moment." "You need more than a moment." He guided her to a nearby water trough, clean and freshly filled, where she could sit on the edge. "Wait here." He disappeared before she could protest, leading his horse toward a building that advertised itself as a restaurant. Sarah sat in the gathering dusk, watching the town settle into evening routines. Lanterns were being lit in windows. The saloon down the street grew louder as men finished their work and sought entertainment. A mother called her children inside. Normal life, the kind she used to have, the kind that seemed impossibly far away now. Isaac returned carrying a wrapped bundle that smelled heavenly. He pressed it into her hands along with a canteen of water. "Eat," he said simply. The bundle contained fried chicken, fresh bread, and potatoes roasted with herbs. Sarah tried to eat slowly, to maintain some dignity, but hunger overwhelmed manners and she devoured it while Isaac stood nearby, not watching her directly but keeping a respectful distance. When she finished, she felt almost human again, though the exhaustion still pulled at her bones. "Thank you," she managed. "I will work to repay this." "You will work because I am paying you to work, not to repay a meal. There is a difference." He offered his hand. "Can you ride?" "I have not in some time, but yes." "Good. I will take you to the ranch. You can start fresh tomorrow after you have rested." Sarah hesitated. She barely knew this man, and the warnings every woman learned echoed in her mind. But what choice did she have? Sleep in the street and hope for better luck tomorrow. Keep walking until her boots fell apart and her strength gave out completely. Isaac seemed to read her hesitation. "My ranch hands live in the bunkhouse. 2 of them have wives who live on the property in their own cabin. You will have the main house's spare room with a lock on the door. I sleep in the barn most nights anyway, since I have been too lazy to wash my own sheets properly." The self-deprecating admission, delivered with such matter-of-fact honesty, made her decision. She took his hand and let him help her to her feet. The ride to the ranch tested what remained of Sarah's strength. She sat in front of Isaac on his horse, trying to maintain a respectful distance but too exhausted to manage it properly. Eventually, she found herself leaning back against his chest, his arms on either side of her as he held the reins, and she was too tired to care about propriety. He smelled like leather and sage and honest sweat, and his heartbeat was steady against her back. "What is your name?" he asked as they rode through the darkening prairie. "Sarah Emerson. You are widowed 3 weeks." The words hurt less than they had at first, but still carried weight. "I am sorry. So am I." They rode in silence after that, and Sarah dozed despite herself, jerking awake periodically when she started to slip sideways. Each time, Isaac's arm tightened slightly, steadying her without comment. The ranch appeared as a collection of lights in the distance, growing larger as they approached. Even in the darkness, Sarah could make out the shapes of buildings. A large barn, several smaller structures that must be the bunkhouse and storage sheds, and a house that was bigger than she expected. 2 stories with a wide porch wrapping around the front. Isaac brought the horse to a stop near the house and dismounted, then reached up to help Sarah down. Her legs nearly buckled when her feet hit the ground, and again his hands steadied her. "I have got you," he said quietly. "Just a few more steps." He guided her up the porch steps and through the front door. The interior was dark until he lit a lamp, revealing a large room that served as both kitchen and living space. He had not exaggerated about the state of things. Dishes were stacked in the wash basin. Dust coated every surface, and the floor needed sweeping badly. But it was still cleaner than sleeping outdoors, and Sarah felt a rush of gratitude so intense it nearly brought tears. "Upstairs, first door on the right," Isaac said. "There should be clean sheets on the bed still. My mother insisted on keeping the guest room ready even though we never have guests. She passed 2 years ago, but I have not had the heart to change her ways." Sarah climbed the stairs on trembling legs, found the room exactly where he said, and discovered he was right about the sheets. They smelled faintly of lavender, and the bed itself was the most beautiful thing she had seen in weeks. She barely managed to remove her boots before collapsing onto it, asleep before her head fully settled into the pillow. When Sarah woke, sunlight was streaming through the window, and she had no idea what time it was. Panic seized her for a moment, the thought that she had overslept her first day, but when she looked out the window, the sun was still fairly low on the horizon. Early morning then, perhaps 6 o'clock or so. Someone had left a pitcher of water and a clean towel on the dresser. Sarah washed as best she could, wishing desperately for a proper bath, but grateful for the chance to remove at least some of the dust from her skin and hair. Her black dress was wrinkled and stained beyond any quick fix, but it was all she had. She did what she could to make herself presentable and headed downstairs. The kitchen was empty, but she could hear voices outside. Through the window, she saw Isaac talking to several men near the barn, all of them gesturing toward a corral where horses moved restlessly. The ranch hands, she assumed, starting their day. Sarah looked around the kitchen with a more critical eye than she had managed last night. The disorder was significant but not overwhelming. She could work with this. She started by building up the fire in the stove, then hauling water from the pump outside to heat for washing dishes. By the time Isaac came back inside, she had the dishes cleaned and was starting on the floor. "You should be resting," he said from the doorway. Sarah did not look up from her scrubbing. "You hired me to work." "I hired you to work after you recovered from walking 70 miles. There is a difference. I am recovered enough." She moved to the next section of floor, attacking a stubborn stain with determination. Isaac was quiet for a moment, and she could feel him watching her, Finally, he said, "At least stop long enough to eat breakfast. I was about to make eggs." "I will make the eggs. That is my job now. Sarah." He said her name quietly but firmly enough that she stopped and looked up at him. His expression was serious but not angry. "You do not have to prove anything. The job is yours whether you work yourself to exhaustion today or take time to adjust. I am not going to change my mind or decide you are not worth the wages." The unexpected kindness threatened to crack something inside her that she needed to keep whole, so she looked away quickly. "I am not used to being idle. Then we will work together. You make the eggs, I will make the coffee, and we will both sit down and eat like civilized people instead of you treating this like some kind of endurance test." It was not a question, so Sarah nodded and got to her feet. Her knees protested but held. Together they prepared breakfast in a surprisingly comfortable silence, moving around each other in the kitchen with an ease that should not have existed between strangers. Sarah found eggs in the cold cellar, butter in the crock, bread that was only slightly stale. Isaac's coffee was strong enough to strip paint, but she drank it anyway, needing the fortification. "Tell me about the hands," Sarah said as they ate. "You said 6. 5 now. Lost one last week when he decided to head further west to the gold fields. There is Tom, he is the oldest and best with horses. Married to Clara, they have the cabin nearest the creek. Then there is Will and his brother James." Sarah flinched slightly at the name and Isaac noticed. "Your husband?" he asked gently. "Yes, but it is fine, it is a common name." He nodded and continued. "Daniel is young but a hard worker, and Martin has been with me since I started the ranch 5 years ago. They are all good men. I do not tolerate drinking on the job or disrespect toward women. You will be safe around them." "You keep saying that I will be safe." "Because I need you to believe it." Isaac met her eyes across the table. "I know you have no reason to trust me or anyone else right now. I know you probably accepted this position partly out of desperation. But I give you my word, Sarah Emerson, that you will be safe on this land and treated with respect, or the person who fails to do so will answer to me." The quiet intensity in his voice sent a shiver down her spine that was not quite fear and not quite anything else she could name. She believed him, which was perhaps foolish, but she did. "Thank you," she said simply. The days that followed fell into a rhythm that was both exhausting and strangely comforting. Sarah rose before dawn to prepare breakfast for the hands, who ate with hearty appetites and awkward politeness, clearly unused to a woman's presence. Tom's wife, Clara, came by on the second day and introduced herself. A warm woman in her 40s who offered help and friendship without prying into Sarah's circumstances. "It is good to have another woman nearby," Clara said as they worked together to tackle the neglected garden. "I love Tom dearly, but sometimes I need conversation that does not revolve around horses and cattle." Sarah found herself smiling, the expression feeling strange on her face after weeks of grief. "I know what you mean." The house slowly transformed under Sarah's determined care. She scrubbed floors until they gleamed, washed windows until they sparkled, beat rugs until no more dust emerged. She organized the pantry, mended torn curtains, and polished furniture that had not seen a cloth in months. The chickens proved as half-wild as Isaac had warned, but Sarah was patient and persistent, and within a week, they were eating from her hand. Isaac was gone most days, working alongside his men to manage the considerable demands of a cattle ranch. But he came in for meals, always removing his hat and washing up first, always thanking her for the food. He spoke little but seemed to relax in the clean, orderly house, and sometimes Sarah caught him watching her with an expression she could not quite read. 2 weeks after her arrival, Isaac came in for supper looking more tired than usual. The hands had already eaten and returned to the bunkhouse, and Sarah had prepared a simple meal of stew and bread. She served him and was about to retreat to the kitchen when he spoke. "Sit with me." Sarah hesitated. "I should clean up." "It will wait, please." She sat, folding her hands in her lap, suddenly uncertain. They had shared breakfast a few times, quick meals before the day's work began, but supper felt different somehow, more intimate. "You have done remarkable work with the house," Isaac said, breaking a piece of bread. "I had forgotten it could look like this. It is a good house. It just needed attention. It needed you." He said it simply, as a statement of fact, but Sarah felt heat rise in her cheeks. They ate in silence for a few moments before Isaac spoke again. "Can I ask you something personal?" Sarah's stomach tightened, but she nodded. "Your husband. Were you happy?" The question surprised her. She had expected him to ask how James died or about her circumstances, not this. "Yes," she said after a moment. "We did not have much, but we were happy. He was a good man." "Then I am sorry for your loss, truly." "Thank you." She paused, then found herself asking, "Have you ever been married?" "No, came close once, about 4 years ago." She was a merchant's daughter from Omaha. Pretty, well-educated, everything a man could want. She came out here to visit, took one look at the ranch, and decided she wanted no part of this life. Cannot say I blamed her. It is hard work and lonely sometimes. "It does not seem lonely to me," Sarah said quietly. "It seems peaceful." Isaac looked at her then, really looked at her, and something passed between them that made Sarah's breath catch. It was too soon, far too soon, to feel anything for this man. James had been dead less than 2 months. But she could not deny the warmth that spread through her chest when Isaac smiled, really smiled, for the first time since she had met him. "I am glad you think so," he said. After that night, things shifted subtly between them. Isaac started coming in earlier for supper, often helping Sarah with the preparation. They talked more, sharing stories about their lives. Sarah learned that Isaac had inherited the ranch from his father, who had died the same year as Isaac's mother, leaving him alone with a struggling operation that he had slowly built into something successful. Isaac learned that Sarah had grown up in Missouri, the youngest of 5 children, and had met James at a church social when she was 18. "He was not handsome like the other boys who courted me," Sarah admitted one evening as they washed dishes together, a routine they had fallen into without discussion. "But he was kind, and he made me laugh. That seemed more important." "It is more important," Isaac said firmly. "Looks fade. Kindness does not." Sarah glanced at him, noting the strong line of his jaw, the way his dark eyes crinkled at the corners when he was amused, the capable strength in his hands. He was handsome, whether he knew it or not, but she was right that it was his kindness that drew her. The way he always asked if she needed anything before he went out for the day. The way he brought her wildflowers once, awkwardly presenting them and saying they were growing near the creek and reminded him of her. The way he listened when she talked, really listened, like her words mattered. A month after Sarah's arrival, a summer storm rolled across the prairie with terrifying speed. Sarah had seen the clouds building all afternoon but had not realized how quickly they would arrive. She was in the chicken coop, trying to get the hens settled for the night, when the first drops fell. Within seconds, it became a deluge. She ran for the house, her skirts immediately soaked and heavy, her hair plastered to her face. The wind whipped across the open ground with enough force to make her stagger, and the rain fell so hard she could barely see. She was halfway to the porch when her foot caught on something, and she went down hard, pain shooting through her ankle. Sarah struggled to rise, but her ankle would not bear weight. The rain pounded down, already turning the ground to mud, and she realized with growing panic that she could not get up on her own. Then Isaac was there, appearing out of the storm like a phantom. He scooped her up without a word, carrying her toward the house as lightning cracked across the sky. He took the porch steps 2 at a time and kicked the door open, not setting her down until they were safely inside. "Are you hurt?" His hands moved over her arms, checking for injuries, his face tight with concern. "My ankle. I twisted it." Isaac knelt immediately, his hands careful as he examined her foot through her soaked stocking. His touch was gentle but sure, the hands of someone who had dealt with injuries before. "Not broken," he said after a moment, "but badly sprained. You need to stay off it for a few days." "I cannot. There is too much work." "The work will wait. Clara can help with meals. You need to rest." Sarah wanted to argue, but the pain in her ankle was intensifying now that the adrenaline was wearing off. Isaac seemed to sense this because he stood and, before she could protest, picked her up again. "What are you doing? Getting you upstairs and into dry clothes before you catch your death." He carried her up to her room and set her carefully on the bed. "I will get towels and bandages. Can you manage the dress on your own, or do you need help?" Sarah's cheeks flamed. "I can manage." He nodded and left, closing the door behind him. Sarah struggled out of her soaked dress, her fingers clumsy with cold and pain. She had just managed to wrap herself in a blanket when Isaac knocked. "Come in." He entered with an armful of supplies, his own clothes as soaked as hers had been, but he ignored his discomfort. He knelt beside the bed and wrapped her ankle with practiced efficiency, then draped a dry towel around her shoulders. "You are shivering," he said, and there was something in his voice that made her look up. Their eyes met and held. Isaac's hand was still on her ankle, warm through the bandage. The rain hammered against the window and thunder rolled across the sky, but Sarah barely heard it. All she could see was the concern in Isaac's face, the careful tenderness in his touch, and suddenly she understood that what she had been feeling was not just gratitude or companionship. "Isaac," she whispered, not even sure what she meant to say. He stood abruptly, putting distance between them. "I should let you rest. Call if you need anything." He was gone before she could respond, and Sarah was left alone with her racing heart and the realization that she was falling in love with her employer. The next few days were difficult in ways that had nothing to do with her injured ankle. Clara came to help with the cooking, a blessing Sarah was grateful for, and Isaac kept his distance, only checking on her ankle morning and evening with professional detachment. Sarah told herself this was proper, that she should be relieved he was maintaining appropriate boundaries, but instead she felt bereft. On the 4th day, she could bear weight on her ankle again. It still ached but was healing well. She came downstairs to find Isaac at the stove, attempting to make breakfast. The kitchen bore evidence of his struggle: spilled flour, broken eggs, and something burning in the pan. "Let me help," Sarah said from the doorway. Isaac turned, looking both relieved and guilty. "You should be resting." "I have rested enough, and it appears you need rescue." Despite everything, he smiled. "I never claimed to be a cook." They worked together to salvage breakfast, and gradually the ease that had existed between them before the storm began to return. But there was a new awareness now, an electric tension that made Sarah's skin tingle when their hands accidentally touched, that made Isaac's gaze linger on her face longer than strictly necessary. The summer heat intensified as July gave way to August. Sarah's ankle healed completely, and she returned to her full duties. The ranch work continued its relentless pace, and Sarah found satisfaction in the routines she had established. But increasingly, her eyes sought Isaac throughout the day. She watched him work with the horses, admiring his skill and patience. She listened for his footsteps on the porch in the evening, her heart lifting at the sound. She treasured the quiet conversations they shared over supper, learning his opinions on everything from politics to poetry. One evening in late August, after the hands had been fed and the kitchen cleaned, Isaac asked Sarah to walk with him. The sun was setting, painting the prairie in shades of gold and amber, and the air had finally cooled to something bearable. They walked in silence toward a small rise that overlooked the ranch. From this vantage point, Sarah could see the entire operation. The house with smoke curling from its chimney, the barn where horses moved in the corral, the bunkhouse where lantern light glowed in the windows, and beyond it all the endless expanse of grassland stretching to the horizon. "This is my favorite spot," Isaac said quietly. "When things get difficult, I come here to remind myself why I do this." "It is beautiful," Sarah agreed. "I never thought I would find someone who saw it the way I do." He turned to look at her, and in the fading light his expression was open and vulnerable. Someone who could love this place and this life. Sarah's breath caught. "Isaac, I know it has only been 2 months. I know it is too soon by any decent measure. I know you are still grieving your husband, and I have no right to ask anything of you." His words came faster now, tumbling out like he had been holding them back too long. "But I have to tell you, Sarah, I have to tell you that you have become essential to me. Not just because you keep my house or cook my meals, but because you make everything better just by being in it. When I wake up in the morning, I look forward to seeing you. When I am out working, I find myself hurrying back just to hear your voice. You make me laugh, you challenge me. You see this life I have built and you appreciate it instead of finding it lacking." Sarah stood frozen, her heart pounding so hard she thought it might break through her ribs. Everything she had been feeling, everything she had been afraid to acknowledge, was reflected in Isaac's words. "I loved James," she said, and saw Isaac's expression close off slightly. She hurried to continue. "I did love him, truly. But he has been gone for almost 3 months now, and I am not the same woman who buried him in Omaha. That woman was lost and afraid and desperate. But here, with you, I have found something I did not expect, something I was not looking for but cannot ignore anymore." Hope flickered in Isaac's eyes. "What did you find?" "Myself first. The strength to keep going, the will to build something new instead of just surviving. But also," she took a breath, gathering courage, "you. I found you, Isaac, and somewhere along the way I started to fall in love with you." The words hung in the air between them for a heartbeat, and then Isaac closed the distance between them, his hands coming up to cup her face with a gentleness that made tears spring to her eyes. "Can I kiss you?" he asked, his voice rough with emotion. "Yes." His lips met hers softly, tentatively at first as if afraid she might break. But Sarah had walked 70 miles through dust and heat to find work, had rebuilt her life from nothing, had survived loss and grief and loneliness. She was not fragile. She kissed him back with all the emotion she had been holding in, all the hope and desire and love that had been growing in secret. When they finally pulled apart, both breathing hard, Isaac rested his forehead against hers. "Marry me," he said. Sarah laughed, the sound surprised out of her. "That is quite a leap from a first kiss." "I am not a patient man, Sarah. I have been patient for 2 months, watching you, waiting, hoping you might feel something for me. Now that I know you do, I do not want to waste any more time. Marry me. Be my wife, my partner, the mistress of this ranch. Let me spend the rest of my life making you happy." "People will talk," Sarah said, but she was smiling. "A widow remarrying so quickly. Let them talk. I do not care about people who have nothing better to do than judge how others live their lives. Do you care?" Sarah thought about the neighbors in Omaha who had turned away from her, the landlord who had evicted her, the banker who had shown pity but no compassion. She thought about the town of Fort Kearny where she had been rejected again and again until Isaac found her. None of those people mattered. None of their opinions had any weight in the life she was building here. "No," she said, "I do not care." "Then marry me, please." Sarah looked into his dark eyes and saw her future there. A future of hard work and simple pleasures, of shared meals and quiet conversations, of building something lasting together. It was not the life she had planned when she married James, but plans changed. People changed. And sometimes loss led to finding something even better, something you never knew you needed until it was standing in front of you asking you to take a chance. "Yes," she said, "I will marry you." Isaac kissed her again, and this time there was nothing tentative about it. His arms came around her waist, pulling her close, and Sarah felt something inside her that had been frozen since James's death finally began to thaw. This was different from what she had felt for James, wilder and more intense, perhaps because she was different now. Stronger. More certain of what she wanted. They were married 3 weeks later in Fort Kearny's small church, with Clara and Tom as witnesses and the ranch hands in attendance. Sarah wore a new dress, pale blue instead of black, purchased with her own wages. Isaac wore his best suit, looking uncomfortable in the formal clothes but unable to stop smiling. The ceremony was simple and brief, but when the preacher pronounced them husband and wife and Isaac kissed her, Sarah felt a joy so complete it was almost overwhelming. The ranch hands had prepared a celebration back at the house, stringing lanterns and preparing more food than a dozen people could eat. There was music and dancing and laughter, and Sarah danced with Isaac under the stars, his arms strong around her, his eyes never leaving her face. "Happy," he murmured as they swayed to a fiddle tune. "Impossibly so," Sarah replied. That night, Isaac carried her over the threshold of the house that was now truly hers, up the stairs to the main bedroom that they would share. He set her down gently and cupped her face in his hands. "I will try to make you happy every day for the rest of our lives," he said seriously. "You already do," Sarah replied, and drew him down for a kiss. Their first year of marriage was not without challenges. A hard winter tested the cattle herd and their resources. Spring brought flooding that damaged the barn and required extensive repairs. Summer's heat killed half the garden despite Sarah's best efforts. But through it all, they faced each difficulty together, and somehow that made even the hardest days bearable. Sarah discovered that being married to Isaac was different from her marriage to James in ways both small and large. Isaac was less talkative but more demonstrative, often pulling her into his arms just because she was nearby, or kissing the top of her head as he passed. He had a dry sense of humor that caught her off guard and made her laugh at unexpected moments. He was stubborn about certain things but willing to compromise on others, and they learned each other's boundaries and quirks through trial and occasional error. The physical side of their marriage brought Sarah a happiness she had not known was possible. With James, intimacy had been pleasant but somewhat perfunctory, something they did because married couples did. With Isaac, it was passionate and consuming, a way of expressing feelings too deep for words. He was tender but also demanding, and Sarah found she liked being wanted with such intensity, liked the way he looked at her like she was the most desirable woman in the world. By the following summer, Sarah knew she was pregnant. She told Isaac one evening after supper, simply presenting him with a tiny pair of knitted booties she had been secretly working on. He stared at them for a long moment before looking up at her with such joy that her throat tightened. "We are having a baby." "Yes." He swept her into his arms, spinning her around the kitchen before setting her down carefully, suddenly afraid he might hurt her. "When?" "February, I think. A winter baby." He pressed his hand to her still flat stomach with something like reverence. "Our baby." The pregnancy progressed smoothly, despite Sarah's initial nervousness. Clara proved an invaluable source of advice and support, having raised 3 children of her own. Isaac became absurdly protective, trying to prevent Sarah from doing any heavy work, which she tolerated with amused patience up to a point before putting her foot down. "I am pregnant, not made of glass," she told him when he tried to stop her from hanging laundry. "I just want you and the baby to be safe. We will be safer if you stop hovering and let me live my life normally." But she loved him for the hovering anyway, for the concern that made him check on her constantly, for the way he talked to her growing belly at night, telling their unborn child about the ranch and the horses, and how much he was looking forward to meeting them. Their son was born on a freezing February night in 1877, with Clara attending and Isaac pacing the floor downstairs like a caged animal. The labor was long and difficult, and there were moments when Sarah feared something was wrong, but Clara's steady presence and firm encouragement got her through. When the baby finally arrived, crying lustily, Sarah felt a rush of love so fierce it took her breath away. This tiny, red-faced creature was hers, theirs, a perfect blend of her and Isaac. "You have a son," Clara called down the stairs, and Sarah heard Isaac's boots thunder on the steps. He burst into the room, his eyes wild with fear and hope, going straight to Sarah. "Are you all right?" "I am fine. We are both fine." She held up the baby, wrapped in a soft blanket. "Meet your son." Isaac took the baby with shaking hands, his large, work-roughened fingers impossibly gentle as he cradled the tiny body. He stared down at his son with an expression of such naked wonder that Sarah felt tears slip down her cheeks. "He is perfect," Isaac whispered. "You are perfect." "Thank you, Sarah. Thank you for this, for him, for everything." They named him James Isaac, honoring both Sarah's first husband and his father. Isaac held his son close and whispered, "I will teach you to ride and rope and work this land, and I will teach you to be kind and honest and true. You will never doubt that you are loved." The first few months of parenthood were exhausting and wonderful in equal measure. James was a demanding baby, crying often and sleeping rarely. But Sarah and Isaac navigated the challenges together, taking turns walking the floor in the middle of the night, supporting each other through the difficult moments. Sarah watched Isaac with their son and fell in love with him all over again. He was so patient, so gentle, singing lullabies in a surprisingly good voice and making silly faces to earn baby smiles. He changed diapers without complaint and gave James his baths with meticulous care, always afraid his large hands might be too rough. As James grew from infant to baby to toddler, the ranch prospered. Isaac hired more hands to help with the expanding operation. They added more cattle, improved the breeding stock, and began selling horses as well as beef. The house was expanded with an additional room for James and plans for more children when they came, and they did come. A daughter they named Susan Isabel arrived when James was 2, an easier baby who seemed content to watch the world with her father's dark eyes. Then another son, Samuel, 2 years after that, followed by twin daughters, Sophie and Stella, who arrived with dramatic suddenness and kept everyone on their toes from day one. The house that had once seemed too large for one lonely man now rang with the sounds of children. Laughter and crying, running feet and shouted games, music lessons and bedtime stories. Sarah often stood in the kitchen doorway, watching Isaac wrestle with their sons or carefully braid their daughter's hair, and marveled at how completely her life had transformed. One evening, when the children were finally asleep after much negotiation and several requests for water, Sarah found Isaac on the porch. He was staring out at the prairie, now dotted with their growing herds, the land they had worked so hard to improve and expand. She came up behind him, wrapping her arms around his waist and resting her cheek against his back. He covered her hands with his own, large and warm. "What are you thinking about?" she asked. "About the day I found you in Fort Kearney, looking lost and determined in equal measure. How different my life would be if I had ridden past you, if I had not stopped. But you did stop. Best decision I ever made." He turned in her arms to face her. "Do you ever regret it, saying yes to me so quickly, marrying a man you barely knew?" Sarah looked up at him, at the face she knew as well as her own now, the lines around his eyes deeper from laughter and sun, the gray starting to thread through his dark hair. They had been married for 12 years, had built a life together, had created a family. They had weathered droughts and hard winters, sick cattle and difficult births, the death of Tom and the marriage of their oldest son. Through it all, they had stood together. "Never," she said firmly. "Not for a single moment. I love you, Sarah Xander. More now than the day I married you, which I would not have thought possible. I love you too. Thank you for giving me a home when I needed one most. Thank you for asking me to rest when I had walked so far. Thank you for seeing something in me worth keeping." Isaac kissed her then, deep and sweet, and Sarah felt the same spark she had felt that first time on the prairie overlook. Some things never dimmed, never faded, only grew stronger with time and care. Years continued to pass, bringing changes and challenges. James grew into a serious young man who loved the ranch as much as his father did and took on more responsibilities, as Isaac's knees grew stiff from decades of hard work. Susan married a schoolteacher from Fort Kearney and moved to town, though she visited often with her own growing family. Samuel decided ranching was not for him and headed east to study law, breaking Isaac's heart a little, though he supported his son's choice. The twins, inseparable as always, married brothers and settled on neighboring properties, bringing their families together for regular gatherings. Through it all, the ranch remained the center of their world. Sarah still rose early to prepare breakfast, though her hands were not as quick as they once were. Isaac still worked the land, though he left the hardest tasks to younger men. They had hired a foreman years ago, a capable man named David who ran the day-to-day operations with efficiency, allowing Isaac and Sarah to step back slightly. On a summer evening in 1895, 20 years after Sarah had walked into Fort Kearney, she and Isaac sat on the porch watching the sunset. It had become their ritual, this quiet time together after supper, watching the light fade over the land they had built their life on. "Do you remember the night you proposed?" Sarah asked, taking Isaac's hand. "Every detail. You looked so beautiful in the sunset, and I was terrified you would say no. I could never have said no to you. I think I loved you from the moment you offered me food without expecting anything in return. I loved you from the moment you refused to take charity, insisting you would work for everything you received. Such stubborn pride." Sarah laughed. "I learned that from you, possibly." They sat in comfortable silence, watching their grandson, James's oldest boy, practice roping in the corral under his father's watchful eye. The next generation, learning the life, carrying on the traditions. "We did well," Isaac said quietly. "Look at what we built, Sarah. Not just the ranch, but the family. 5 children, 8 grandchildren so far, all of them healthy and happy. We did that together." "We did," Sarah agreed, "and I would not change a single thing. Well, perhaps I would have preferred not to walk 70 miles in worn-out boots, but even that brought me here, so perhaps I would not change it after all." Isaac lifted her hand to his lips, kissing her knuckles with the same tenderness he had shown on their wedding night. "You were always strong enough for this life. I just gave you a place to show it. You gave me more than a place. You gave me a home, a family, a purpose. You gave me love when I thought I would never feel it again. You gave me everything, Isaac. And you gave me the same, sweetheart. The same and more. As the stars began to emerge in the darkening sky, Sarah leaned against Isaac's shoulder, his arm coming around her automatically. They had sat like this thousands of times over the years, on this same porch, watching this same view, and Sarah hoped they would sit like this thousands more. But even if they did not, even if their time was growing shorter as age crept up on them both, she was grateful for every moment they had shared. She thought back to that desperate woman who had walked into Fort Kearney with nothing but determination and a willingness to work. She had been looking for employment, for a way to survive. Instead, she had found a man who saw her worth, who offered her not just work but rest, not just shelter but a home, not just kindness but love. That woman could never have imagined this life, this richness of family and purpose and deep, abiding love. But Sarah Xander, sitting on the porch of her ranch with her husband's arm around her, could not imagine any other life. This was where she belonged, where she had always been meant to be. It had just taken walking 70 miles and meeting one kind cowboy to find it. The night deepened around them, and eventually they rose to go inside, to the house that had sheltered their love and their family for 2 decades. Tomorrow would bring new challenges and new joys, but tonight Sarah was content to simply be here, with Isaac, in the home they had built together. As they climbed the stairs to their bedroom, Isaac's hand warm in hers, Sarah sent up a silent prayer of gratitude for the day she had walked into Fort Kearney, exhausted and desperate. For the cowboy who had stopped when he could have ridden past. For the chance to build this beautiful, imperfect, wonderful life. In the bedroom, Isaac helped her with the buttons on her dress as he had done for 20 years, his fingers still capable despite the arthritis starting to settle in. She helped him with his boots, a nightly ritual. They prepared for bed together, comfortable in the intimacy of long marriage, and when they finally lay down, Isaac pulled her close. "Good night, my love," he whispered against her hair. "Good night," Sarah replied, pressing a kiss to his chest. She closed her eyes and felt herself drift toward sleep, safe in Isaac's arms, in the home they had built, in the life they had created from a chance meeting on a dusty street. It had all started with kindness, with one man seeing a woman in need and offering help without expecting anything in return. That simple act had blossomed into love, into family, into everything that mattered. Sarah had walked 70 miles to find work. Instead, she had found Isaac, who had given her a home and asked her to rest. And in resting, in accepting his help, in allowing herself to believe she deserved kindness, she had found not just a place to live but a reason to thrive. As sleep claimed her, Sarah's last conscious thought was simple and profound. She was home, she was loved, and she was exactly where she was meant to be. The widow who had walked so far had finally arrived, and the cowboy who had offered her shelter had become her whole world. Their story was not unique in the grand scheme of the Old West, but it was theirs, built on hard work and honest love, on taking chances and believing in second opportunities. And as the Nebraska wind whispered across the prairie and the stars wheeled overhead, the ranch house stood solid and sure, sheltering the family that love had built, a testament to what could grow from the simple act of one person helping another when help was needed most. The years that followed brought the inevitable changes that time always brings. Some were joyful, more grandchildren, the expansion of the ranch as James took over more operations, and the celebration of Sarah and Isaac's 25th wedding anniversary with the whole family gathered under lanterns strung between the house and barn. Some were sorrowful, The loss of Clara, who had been Sarah's first friend in Nebraska, and the death of Martin, Isaac's loyal foreman who had become like family, through it all, Sarah and Isaac remained each other's anchor. When Isaac's father's old injuries from ranch work began to plague him more seriously, Sarah was there with warm compresses and gentle hands. When Sarah fell ill one winter with pneumonia, Isaac barely left her bedside, sleeping in a chair next to their bed and coaxing her to take broth when she had no appetite. "You cannot leave me," he had said during the worst of it, his voice rough with fear. "I am not ready. I will never be ready." "Then I will stay," Sarah had whispered, and she fought her way back to health through sheer determination and Isaac's steadfast care. By their 30th anniversary, the ranch had grown into one of the most successful operations in the region. James ran it with his father's blessing and his mother's organizational skills, implementing new techniques while respecting the traditions Isaac had established. The original ranch house had been expanded twice more, and a new house had been built for James and his family nearby. But Sarah and Isaac remained in the home where their love had first taken root. On a spring morning in 1905, 30 years after Sarah had walked into Fort Kearny, she woke to find Isaac already up and dressed, standing at the bedroom window. "Come back to bed," she murmured. "It is early still." "I want to show you something," he said, offering his hand. Sarah rose, curious, and let him lead her downstairs and outside. The sun was just beginning to paint the sky with streaks of gold and pink. Isaac led her to the small rise where he had proposed all those years ago, and Sarah caught her breath at what she saw. Someone had built a bench there, solid and beautiful, with their names carved into the back. Isaac and Sarah Xander, 1875. Below it, more names. Their children, their grandchildren, a family tree carved in wood. "James and I built it," Isaac said quietly. "I wanted a place where we could come, where future generations could come and remember where it all started. This is where I asked you to marry me. This is where you said yes. Everything that came after, all the joy and love and family, it started right here." Sarah felt tears slip down her cheeks as she ran her fingers over the carved names. So many names now. So much love grown from that one moment of courage when she had accepted his proposal. "It is perfect," she whispered. They sat together on the bench, watching the sun rise over the ranch, and Sarah thought about all the sunrises they had witnessed together. Thousands upon thousands of mornings, waking up next to each other, starting new days side by side. She had been so young when she married Isaac, only 21 and already a widow, already worn down by grief and hardship. He had been 28, lonely and longing for someone to share his life. They had taken a chance on each other, two people who barely knew each other but somehow recognized something essential, something true. And that chance had become this, a legacy of love that would continue long after they were gone. "Thank you," Sarah said softly. "For what?" "For stopping that day in Fort Kearny, for seeing me when I felt invisible, for offering me a home when I had none, for asking me to rest when I had walked so far, for loving me when I thought I would never be loved again." Isaac took her hand, his grip still strong despite his 78 years. "You made it easy to love you, Sarah. You always have. And you made it easy to build a life. I was so lost when I came here. I thought I was just looking for work, for a way to survive. But you gave me so much more. You gave me a reason to thrive." They sat in silence as the sun climbed higher, warming their faces. From the house, they could hear the sounds of James's family beginning their day, children's voices calling back and forth, the clatter of breakfast preparations. The ranch was waking up, ready for another day of work and life. "Do you ever wonder what would have happened if you had ridden past me that day?" Sarah asked. "Never, Because I did not ride past. I stopped and you changed my life. That is the only reality that matters. I love you, Isaac Xander. I have loved you for 30 years, and I will love you for whatever time we have left. And I love you, Sarah Xander. You are the best thing that ever happened to me. They rose from the bench eventually, making their way back to the house where family and responsibilities awaited. But they returned to that bench often in the years that followed, sitting together in the quiet moments, remembering and celebrating the life they had built. When Isaac passed away peacefully in his sleep at the age of 84, Sarah was beside him, holding his hand as she had held it thousands of times before. The grief was immense, a wave that threatened to drown her, but she weathered it surrounded by the family they had created together. 5 children, 16 grandchildren, and 4 great-grandchildren all gathered to say goodbye to the man who had built not just a ranch but a dynasty of love. Sarah lived 6 more years, spending her final days in the house. Isaac had brought her to 51 years earlier. She sat often on the bench he had built, talking to him as if he could hear, telling him about the grandchildren and great-grandchildren, about the ranch that continued to prosper under James's careful management. When she died at 87, her children gathered around her bed, holding her hands and whispering their love. Her last words were simple: "Tell your father I am coming home." They buried her next to Isaac on the rise overlooking the ranch, near the bench where he had proposed. The whole family gathered, multiple generations united in grief and love, to say goodbye to the woman who had walked 70 miles to find work and instead found everything that mattered. The ranch continued to thrive, passed down through the generations, each one adding their own mark while honoring the foundation Isaac and Sarah had laid. The bench remained, weathered by years and wind but still solid, still bearing the carved names of the couple who had started it all. And sometimes, on quiet evenings when the sun painted the prairie gold, those who knew the story would swear they could see 2 figures sitting on that bench, holding hands and watching the sunset together. Just a trick of the light, perhaps, or maybe something more. Maybe 2 souls who had found each other against all odds, who had built a love that transcended death, still keeping watch over the land and family they had created. The story of Sarah and Isaac became family legend, passed down to each new generation. The widow who walked 70 miles to find work. The cowboy who gave her a home and asked her to rest. 2 people who took a chance on love and built something that lasted far beyond their own lifetimes. It was a simple story in many ways, but also profound. A reminder that kindness matters, that love can bloom in unexpected places, that sometimes the greatest adventures begin when you are simply trying to survive. Sarah had been looking for work, for a way to keep going after loss had nearly destroyed her. Isaac had been looking for help running his ranch, for someone to share the burden of daily life. What they found was so much more: partnership, passion, deep and abiding love that sustained them through 3 decades of marriage and created a legacy that would endure for generations. They found home in each other, rest in each other's arms, purpose in building a life together. And it all started with a simple act of kindness on a dusty street in Fort Kearney, Nebraska, in the summer of 1875, when a cowboy saw a woman in need and offered help. When a widow found the courage to accept. When 2 strangers took a chance that changed both their lives forever. Their story ended the way all good love stories should, with a life well lived, a family well loved, and the certainty that what they built together would continue long after they were gone. The ranch still stands, run now by their great-great-grandchildren, and the bench still sits on the rise, a monument to the day everything changed. And if you ever find yourself in Nebraska, driving past ranch land that stretches to the horizon, you might see that bench and wonder about the names carved there. You might imagine the story of two people who found each other when both needed it most. You might think about how sometimes the greatest loves begin with the simplest gestures, how home is not always a place but a person, how rest is not just the absence of work, but the presence of peace. The Wild West was full of stories, tales of outlaws and lawmen, of gold rushes and cattle drives, of violence and adventure. But among all those stories, the quiet tale of Sarah and Isaac stands as a reminder that love stories happen there too. Real love, lasting love, the kind that builds legacies and creates families and endures beyond death. A widow walked miles to find work. A cowboy gave her a home and asked her to rest. And from that simple beginning grew a love that lasted a lifetime and beyond, a testament to the power of kindness, the strength of commitment, and the enduring nature of true love. Their story became part of the land itself, woven into the fabric of the ranch, remembered and celebrated by every generation that followed. And somewhere in whatever comes after this life, two souls rest together at last, still holding hands, still in love, still grateful for the day their paths crossed on a dusty street in Fort Kearney and changed everything forever.